Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, and I am doing a series here on way of understanding evil, which I've defined as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse, or um, to make the human world more broken, is another way of putting it. And I claim that one can see that there is, in fact, that kind of coherent force. But I recognize that a lot of people might dismiss this as you say, like you could, like I'm naming a unicorn. What coherent force? You know, it, the destructive things that go on in the world, the greed, the hatreds, the cruelties, the injustices. They're all, things that just sort of like happen out there, like different lightning bugs that trigger off in the on a summer night, with no respect to one another. Well, um, I can understand that you might think that the idea of a coherent force might be interesting if there were such a thing, but there isn't such a thing. So why talk about a force of evil when there is no such coherent force? Well, let me. First of all, it's important to start looking for coherent forces if you want to find them. For example, I recognize that fascism was rising back in the very beginning of the 1990s, but it was a very long time before people in uh, liberal America, the democratic political realm, uh, started seeing that something fundamental had gone wrong on the other side of the major party system. Yeah, until actually rather recently, and I've been trying to put out certain ideas for a long time, so I know this. Uh, the people would see that the Republican Party was being, you know, on the wrong side of that issue, and they were being on the wrong side of that issue. They were inflaming racial hostilities. They were denying science change, climate change. But they didn't, and they were also doing various unprecedented things in the political realm. Even starting in the 1990s, there was a sense in which the right got embarked upon a struggle for power that was more unrestrained than things had been, and um, there was a sociopathic quality that was emerging in the Republican Party as people like Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich got to be the face of the party. They were also the soul of the party, and it was pretty sociopathic. But if you don't put the pieces together, you don't see that there is a coherent force here. If you've got a dozen different dimensions in which the political system is is divided, and you ask which side is pushing in the direction that would make things better, and which side is pushing in the direction that would make things worse. It got to be, and I don't think it always was, but it got to be increasingly from the early 90s onward. Maybe you could go back to Reagan, but things were moving continually in the direction of consistently the Republican role made things worse. And I sort of watched this and was sort of alarmed because I'm more of a bridge building guy. When I saw that the Republican Party had become so coherent a force for making things worse. It wasn't like you flipped a coin. Well, you'll either on race relations you'll be good, or not, depending on whether it's heads or tails. And then you flip it again for, climate change, whether you're going to be on board for doing the responsible thing or whether you're going to try to paralyze the country and be the instrument of the fossil fuel company. Or eventually now, whether you're going to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law or support a movement into an authoritarian fascistic order. And I thought that this might be an opportunity to show something that's important to know about the drama at the center of the human world and why there is that drama, what the nature of it is. And it is something which is about two coherent forces battling over the human future. And in the larger picture, we human beings are in a frame of our social evolution where we have the ability to destroy ourselves, and we're challenged to make things well ordered before we destroy ourselves. And the thing that would lead us to destroy ourselves is this coherent force that arises, I say, with civilization. But let me, in this moment, talk about another way of seeing the coherence. I discovered this because it was the first way that led me into seeing it. I was just sort of amazed at, every issue, the Republicans are acting in a destructive way, and they're degrading in other ways that were visible from the early 90s and progressively. Putting the pieces together. Then I went looking. Once I saw that there is such a thing as a coherent force that's actually an actor in the world. And I've studied several of these, besides today's Republican conservative, conservative America. I've studied, in a sense, how when evil, destructive force took over in the 1850s leading into the Civil War, how that brokenness worked to create catastrophe. And then the other one that I've looked at is what happened in Germany, German culture emerging into the 20th century, going through World War I and all the rest of the stuff, and leading to the rise of Nazi Germany. And I started looking into, how does this stuff work? And that led me to see that there is something coherent that goes on in the human world that could come under the banner of brokenness begets brokenness. In other words, in the network of cause and effect in our world, inevitably there are connections between things. And if we look at those connections, we can see that for everything that we might identify as being on the brokenness, evil side of things, like conflict and division and hatred and injustice and all those things, and ask, what are the causes that brought this about? In other words, to place it in terms of something really essential to understand about the human world, which is that things are moving through time in the human world. It doesn't just stay the same. Events, produce effects, and each of those effects produce other effects. And there's this whole movement through time of causes and effects of all kinds. And one kind, and it's not trivial, it's important to look at, is, well, how did this person become greedy? What are the causes? And how did this social system where people of one genetic line, racial or national or whatever, are laboring as slaves to people of another. How did that come about? And here's what I would say: you discover that overwhelmingly the explanation of how we got to this broken thing that we see in the world is that it was produced by other broken things. It leads to, like a war leads to trauma, which is a form of brokenness, which leads to disordering behavior in the world of some kind. Brokenness begets brokenness of all kinds. And that leads to understanding the concept of brokenness, in which injustice and hatred and conflict and the various other things, selfishness, they're all the consequence of one another. There's something that's being transmitted through time, and I call it a pattern of brokenness, that you can look, if you look deep at how life is organized and look at the effects of a broken thing on the well-being and health and et cetera of whatever gets impacted, you can see that there is a kind of wholeness which has got to do with the good of life being perpetuated, creatures with experience finding more fulfillment and less pain, a kind of a wholeness, which is what life in a sense strives for, and created creatures like us that we by nature strive for. And then there's brokenness, where you've got greedy people like the Koch brothers. Now, the Koch brothers, I think I wrote back in, almost 20 years ago, that I thought that they had achieved something beyond anything that I knew of in American history as private individuals, to have such a major impact on sort of the organizing of this coherent force. Not just on climate change, but creating things like ALEC. And anyway, they were extraordinary. Now, can you imagine what kind of state of a human being it takes if you are billionaires many times over, like the Koch brothers, and you're also willing to sacrifice the generations to come of our descendants, our children, our grandchildren, all that, to get more money, which is what they did with their pretty successful efforts to cripple the country with respect to responding to climate change. It was a huge achievement. I mean, I think, as I say, unparalleled. How do you get somebody who would make a decision like that in spite of having billions of dollars? Would you? If you had billions of dollars, would you sacrifice the human future to get some more? No, there's something profoundly broken there, and I don't have any idea about what the growing up experience was of these two boys in the Koch family to produce monsters like this. Whatever it was, I know enough psychology to know that if you looked at how Donald Trump got greedy too, you would find out that it really has to do with some fundamental human needs that were not getting met in the earliest developmental. Somehow greed was a way of pursuing a substitute for the good feeling human love that a child naturally craves. We all get a mixture of things, but some people really get damaged. They get broken, and the brokenness begot brokenness, their greed, and then it ramifying into the America's political world. And Trump and Trumpism are part of the. I expect that you could trace a whole lot of causality from what the Koch brothers achieved to making it possible for something like Donald Trump to get to power. And if you ask, we're trying to look at things as they move through time, because coherent force really has to be observed in this case by seeing the connections that move through time in the dense network of causes and effect. Broken things caused this thing, and then this thing had other consequences in the world. Oh, and look, all of them are forms of brokenness too. So if you trace this pattern of brokenness that's moving through the human world and changing forms like a shape-shifting thing, you can see that it's being pushed, in a sense, through causes and effects. And that which pushes things to move through, and the pattern of brokenness that's moving through in shape-shifting ways, that's a definition of a force. Is it something that makes things move? And you can infer that built into the whole natural world of causes and effects is that if you've got an impetus of brokenness that get introduced into the human world, we'll get to that in a second, then it will ramify through time as that particular force causes brokenness to move through the human world over time. Causes, effects, consequences, and onward. That's a coherent force. And you can see it. I'm very fond of this image as capturing what it is. It captures what it has been like for me to see this force, that once you've got this impetus of brokenness, to which I'll get in a minute, it's just going to keep ramifying as long as the reasons are for things not to get made whole. The whole question of where that came from is the one I'll take up next. I realize that I'm just hypothesizing that, okay, once you start the thing, it'll keep on going unless you're able to contain the ongoing ramifications where, broken cultures produce families that produce broken people. So, well, why is the world, why are these cultures broken? And that's really the foundation from which all my thinking has gone, because in 1970 I got the insight into where the step onto the path of civilization had important ramifications that nobody had looked at yet. That actually there's a great danger that comes from being clever creatures like us, because we were able to depart from a natural order that has its issues for anybody, but it works and you don't have to worry about it. The problem of good and evil doesn't exist before human beings introduced a disorder that we got when we stepped out. That's what I have seen. And I'll be back to talk about that. But I'll just say, it is inevitable that there will be a selective process that narrows the potential directions that civilization can evolve in some unfortunate ways that only certain kinds of societies that are not necessarily really not the ones we would have chosen, that there is a destructive impetus that emerges when we left the natural order. And that impetus has been enough to make being a civilization creating creature a real painful challenge to have to meet. It's like we've been cascading through time, dealing with a big destructive force that we couldn't help but unleash if we were going to be inventive like that. It turns out to be very dangerous to be inventive like that. There's a real benefit from staying in the niche in which you evolve biologically. There are costs too, but now when you step into a whole new situation that has nothing to keep it in good order, you end up with a destructive force being unleashed that operates in various ways that I can continue to expand upon, in a way that evil has traditionally been understood to operate. And that the drama at the center of the human world, one of the big dramas, the biggest drama, I think, is between two coherent forces that act like good and evil. You can name them what you want, but they're there, and that's what I think I can show. And the reason that they're there is that the step onto the path of civilization creates a problem that can't be solved. And the consequence of the problem it creates is that any creature on any planet that steps across across the threshold of civilization, that embarks on that path, will be condemned to experience a history as ugly and tormented as human history has been. It's not been all that well designed for leading to human fulfillment. There's a lot of ugliness in that history. And what if once we understand the inevitability of a force, a destructive force emerging, not as a function of our nature, I should emphasize, but as part of the dynamics of the system, which is a disordered system. The problem of evil would beset any creature that steps across that path on any planet in the cosmos that might happen. And so it could be of value for us to understand that our cleverness plunged us into a situation in which there were forces that we could not readily bring under control, and that took an enormous toll on us and on the planet too. And to understand that this destructive force should be seen in a holistic kind of way. And part of seeing it in a holistic way is to understand how it emerged inevitably once we started inventing our own way of life. So I'll be back for that in this series on the best way to understand evil. I've written it up in some systematic ways you can find easily on my website, betterhumanstory.org. Nice search box. You'll find plenty. Understanding evil. Another piece there that you might be interested in is how there's a discernible force like evil can be seen operating in the human world. I can't remember what the title is, but you'll find it in A Fateful Step, because the problem of evil arises when the creature, first on its planet, after life has been evolving for 3.5 billion years, steps out of its biologically evolved niche and opens up these possibilities. But it turns out that only some possibilities selected by the system can embody the future. So the human future has been a whole lot uglier than any clear picture of human nature. The ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. The evil that is important to recognize is a systemic issue, and it has to be beaten at the systemic level. Doesn't mean not dealing with whatever stuff is inside us. I mean, I wish the Koch brothers had dealt with their greed in some other way. And the malignant narcissist soon to take the White House. I wish he had not become what he has become. I've wondered lately if Donald Trump is the most impactful figure in all of American history. How does he compare with George Washington, who served some very important functions at the founding? How important was Abraham Lincoln, who provided a political leadership that led to the Union staying together? I don't know. How important was Franklin Roosevelt, whose role in dealing with the Great Depression and leading the American people through the Great Depression and then through World War II? I don't know, but Trump is huge. And what we have been through just now, the re-election of Trump, is also huge. The American people were given a choice between essentially good and evil. I mean, Hollywood, if Hollywood were to act out what Trump was offering and his allies, they were to act it out in some cartoon fashion, and they were to act out what Kamala was offering. You know that Kamala would have been as lovely as any of the heroines. She would have been Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast and all that stuff. She would just have been the embodiment of the good. And you know how they would have drawn Trump with they're eating the dogs and all the rest of the stuff that he put out there that was as ugly as could be. It was like he was daring America to reject his ugliness. You should understand that the American people were given a really clear choice, unbelievably clear, almost like a Disney movie where the wicked stepmother gives Snow White the rotten apple and she's drawn in a particular way. Ugly, ugly, ugly. And they chose it. So there's a kind of brokenness that needs to be understood. I work at it, but the most fundamental brokenness that we've got right now to look at, I mean, not in addition to fighting the political battles that we're going to have to fight, is how did it come to pass that even when Kamala did as good a job as anybody could have done of being the Disney character that displays the good, how could it happen that the majority of the American people would choose instead this huge ugliness? So this is a victory for a force that emerged when we started on the path of civilization. This is its current form here in America, but it's recognizable. I mean, it's really the same spirit as you can see carved onto the walls of the Near East as emperors conquered other people and marched them back to their capitals to work their whole lives as slaves. the pride they took in slaughtering their enemies. Human evil is an important problem to understand because there's a social evolutionary process that makes it inevitable a creature walks onto the path of civilization, that what you might call the spirit of the gangster will be given a disproportionate in determining which way human civilization will develop. And I'll talk about that in the next series. And once it gets started, through the web of cause and effect in a perfectly naturalistic fashion, a force that acts like evil was understood to act emerges into the world, pushing brokenness in all of its forms through the world, and sometimes taking control of a particular actor, as has happened here in America, whom the American people have now chosen to give a dangerous amount of power to. Could lead to a whole lot more brokenness, as the effects of the old brokenness that got Trump elected lead to still more brokenness of who knows how profound a nature. Thanks. Like, subscribe, go to abetterhumanstory.org. Thank you for listening.